just quickly, I'll give you a minute just to quickly look at answering the poll that's just popped up on your screen. As we go, you are welcome to list your questions in the group chat, and we will actually give away a prize tonight for the best question that was asked. So keep those questions going as we give the talk, and then we'll come back to them a little bit later after the talk and try and pick a nice question to award the prize. So I've got another 10 seconds for the polling to go. Beth, are there any more people in the waiting room?
Nope, waiting room is clear.
Okay, I'm going to close the polling and I'm going to share the results. So, have you ever used DA before? And 4 of you have actually done that. I hope that doesn't include Horia and Gareth. No. For the rest of you, the majority of you haven't used DA before. Okay, now before I launch the screen, I've got a second question that I want to ask. Oh, okay, sorry, it's a little bit of a technical issue here. I've got a second question just to look at getting you involved here. And do you think that DA is a scaling framework, B, just another methodology, C, a toolkit, or D, a decision-making framework? So I'll give you another minute for that.
Yeah, it's very nice. As co-hosts, we don't get to vote, so not a worry there.
Okay, so we're up on 48 votes of 65. There we've gone close to 60 now, 55 of 65. Okay, we're almost there. And number 59 has just voted. And we've got another 5 seconds left. Right, 60 voted on the dot. Okay, I've closed the voting. So for those of you that, for the majority of you that hasn't used DA before, you still think that it's a decision-making framework, and in second place it is another a toolkit, and then some of you think it is a scaling framework or another methodology. Okay. So I'm going to close the polling now and just start the slide deck, and I'm going to share that. So just give me a thumbs up, guys. Are you able to see it? Perfect. Okay. Now, I don't know if you've seen the title of the talk, but I think the toolkit in the polling was a sort of a giveaway in the title. So there we go. So in the section, we'll be talking about, what is Discipline Agile. So we'll give you a little bit of an overview, and then make the case for why Discipline Agile is actually become quite important in our industry. And then we'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek of overview of Discipline Agile, and then we'll show you how you can actually go and choose your ways of working. Okay, so jumping straight into there, some of you may have heard that PMI acquired Discipline Agile, and people were like, what? A project management organization actually bought an Agile organization. So that was quite an interesting development in our industry. And the news broke in August 2019 that PMI or DA became part of PMI. So what this does is it provides guidance to help organizations choose their ways of working that's really context sensitive and providing a solid foundation for their agility. So it's a whole toolkit, and so many of you mentioned that you think it was a toolkit instead of a scaling framework of agile strategies and practices that complement any agile framework or method such as Scrum or SAFe. So the message here is that it is not another framework. It's actually an and. So you can actually use the DA and the strategies in DA inside Scrum or inside your own bespoke developed methodology or set of practices that you've actually chosen. It's really complementary. There's some cases where DA has been used alongside SAFe implementations in other parts of the world. So it's actually about having choice and making sure that you have contextualized choice. So we'll come back to that having choice and context a little bit later. But for now, if you look at this, all of these terms on the screen, all of these have been actually formally been described by the Agile Manifesto in 2001. But even before that, there's been quite a lot of these practices that's been in use since the mid-90s. So things like extreme programming has been in use in the mid-90s. So the question is that if we've been using some of these things or many of these things, why are we still struggling with Agile, especially when you move beyond the size of a specific team? When you look at all of this, many of you may have seen the little underground map of all the Agile practices and frameworks and methodologies that was created by one of the big consultancy firms. And this is a very similar type of view in it. So it shows that the actual Agile community is quite fractured in many respects. There's hundreds of practices that you can follow. Some of them have significant overlap between some of the frameworks that's out there. There's also significant gaps that Agile, some frameworks have and others also don't have. And then no matter who you talk to, I have a standing joke that if you get 2 Agile coaches in a room, you get 11 opinions about something. And this is very much, very much in the case of getting conflicting advice. You get quite a lot of that inside organizations. And then there's the trap of niche certifications. And niches is really about self-interest driven by small boutiques that have got no incentive to unify their ideas around a common body of knowledge. So when we look at all of these are all pieces of the puzzle, and the context is actually quite important. It will determine the best fit for each one of these or a combination of these practices. So remember the 10th principle of the Agile Manifesto is about simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. That's essential. So we've been, the industry has been really needing and crying out for a unifying body to bring cohesion to our industry. Some agreements on some common terminologies, a way to organize all of this content, and then remove some redundancies where there's double up. So what you also want to look at is, while you do all of that, is to provide guidance in explain in what context the different approaches work. So some things may work in certain contexts and some may not. So Discipline Agile, when they explained it to PMI, the head of PMI said, well, it's like an umbrella over Agile and lean ways of thinking and working. So Agile, Discipline Agile provides that umbrella. Now, the architects or the original thought leaders in this space was those three gentlemen on the left. It's Scott Amler, Mark Lyons, and then Al Shalloway joined just shortly, joined PMI with net objectives and his Flex framework shortly after them. And they are now part and parcel of the think tank that sits behind Discipline Agile going forward. So what we do is when we do look at all of those different practices, we also keep the context in mind, and this enables the teams to deliberately choose and rapidly improve their ways of working. Horia.
Next slide, please. We're going to focus on why Agile matters to us. Essentially, there's a lot of confusion between project management and Agile ways of thinking and working. And fortunately, a few years ago, we've managed to inspire the Project Management Institute to pay closer attention to the Agile community and what we bring. And PMI has started to discover that, okay, there's quite a lot here, and we've put together an Agile practice guide that accompanies the latest version of the PMBOK. And there's even better news, the last edition of the PMBOK that will hopefully still get released later this year is no longer going to be process-based, it's going to be principles-based. So in other words, we see a significant transformation in the traditional project management community and profession, and there's a lot more of an overlap than is seen in this slide here. So not only do we have a recognition in the Agile practice guides as an addition to the PMBOK, the next version, the next refresh of the PMBOK will draw even more on some of the ways of thinking of Discipline Agile. Discipline Agile also brings more unity between the lean and the Agile ways of thinking. A lot of people mistakenly think that Agile is Scrum and everything has to be Scrum, and then they go, but Scrum wouldn't quite fit here, so then Agile doesn't matter to us. And that's completely wrong, because it's not all Agile is Scrum. Yes, the rhythm-based approach is useful in many contexts, but in others, a flow-based lean type approach is way better. And it's still an Agile lean kind of thing. Unfortunately, we don't have a better term that combines Agile with lean together. And Discipline Agile is trying to redress this by bringing both under the same umbrella. Next slide, please. One more click. This slide is intended to build. Raise our game as far as Agile is concerned. It's not at all surprising that, yeah, yet one more certification, yet one more approach, it might generate a little bit of frustration. But despite all that, we need better ways of doing work. We need better ways of engaging with organizations, creating more customer delight, improving the way of work. One more click, please. There's even this idea of the Agile industrial complex to represent the, shall we say, somewhat dubious practices of certain people where we have different degrees of value and different kinds of certification. So that further generates a sense of dissatisfaction that Discipline Agile is aiming to redress, to bring a lot more clarity and professionalism and really help organizations to really speed up their continuous improvement path. You're going to see, we're going to describe a little bit in a bit more detail later on this idea of guided continuous improvement. One more click, please. So finally, because the project management profession is essential for getting things done, for helping people bring ideas into reality, there's no magical technique for just having a reverse explosion where things just naturally jump into outcomes, we still need human skill and ingenuity and ability to create items and services and products. Therefore, professional project management and the skills associated with are still valuable and necessary. Disciplined Agile brings a lot of insight into how to do that well, um, initially from a foundation of software development. But the more we practice, the more we notice that these lean and agile ways of thinking are valuable and useful in many more realms than just IT. So DA and PMI can very nicely harmonize to bring a lot of insight into how can we do this well. And in addition to that, PMI has invested in embracing the flex framework, which gives us a better view of how do we focus well on value streams and how can we do portfolio management and value stream assessments, and use that to improve and then continuously improve value flow to customers. And there's also the Bright Line initiative in PMI that focuses on executive education and um, um, thought leadership to help people understand how to put this all together and what kind of leadership habits and insights and support is necessary to make flex and discipline agile and traditional project management skills and abilities work really, really well together. One more click, please.
Okay, this is where I take back control a little bit. So I'm just going to give you a quick brief overview of the main elements of Discipline Agile. And the first thing is it's really rooted in that mindset that's driven by principles and guidelines. So they've taken the original um, uh, Agile Manifesto's principles and guidelines and expanded a little bit by actually making sure that things like that, adding things that that helps you to understand a little bit more about your context. So, for instance, they brought principles in that's around being enterprise aware. So they've extended the Agile Manifesto by including things like that, like being enterprise aware. Then there's a real focus on people, and there's quite a lot of ideas or choices around roles and responsibilities and things to consider or evaluate whether it could work for your context or not. And then some ideas around team structures in which you can play around with. So, and that will get you going on your thinking about structuring and roles and responsibilities. So it's a nice and handy uh, toolkit to help you with those tough conversations sometimes. Then the next section, it focuses on flow, and this is about how does work flow through the organization. And there's quite a lot of, they've got 6 life cycles that they describe and a lot of workflows that support those life cycles and so on. And with the addition of flex to this, this gives you that capability of looking at flow at an enterprise or even at a portfolio layer as well. And then there's quite a lot of practices that you can go and pick and choose from and experiment with to see what works for your context and what does not work for your context. Now, I spoke about the principles and guidelines. So let's go back to some of the principles of DA. And this is what it means to be disciplined. Right at the center, it is about delighted customers. And I suspect they read the Poppendix books about delighting your customers. That if it wasn't for customers, we wouldn't really have jobs. So this is the foundation of what we need to focus on. And these are principles instead of a set of rules. So use these principles like the manifesto's principles to guide you in how you approach delivering and choosing your ways of working. It does take some discipline to keep coming back to this. I've seen teams that's gone through the Agile Manifesto and then they've seen it 20 years ago or whenever it was launched, and then they think they know it. They don't even go back in their retrospectives to go and evaluate things like that. So this is where real discipline comes in, is to regularly come back to basic principles and see if you're still honoring it or if your context has changed. The other thing that they're also looking at, and this is where they borrowed a little bit from the Kirievsky stable, and this is from being awesome. So teams want to be awesome, as well as customers, and by using DA, they can actually use the choices available to be awesome. We're also quite pragmatic over being dogmatic. So the pragmatism comes here that if something doesn't work in your situation, go pick something else. And you'll see later on when I show you a little process goal about how do you actually use the choices to be quite pragmatic. I've hammered the point home quite a lot about context counts, and what we find that not everything works in every situation, and we need to be quite aware of what are the factors of the situation, and then we can go and pick and choose the right types of techniques or thinking for that situation. Choice is good because it empowers teams, and that allows us then to optimize flow, and we got to keep aware of the enterprise. I see from experience, I've bumped up onto the glass ceiling because that's not the way we've always done things here if you want to try and implement something. So that enterprise awareness of what practices and methods or thinking would work or would not work in your context is really important. So it does look into portfolio management and some considerations of that, as well as product management, organizational change management, and some of those bigger practices that spans the organization. We also have to understand, and we've all seen this, that an organization is a complex adaptive system, and it's actually a collection of interacting teams, and everyone has got their own way of working. So why would you go and force them all to work in a uniform way? They're not automatons in a factory that only works on predetermined code. We work in a complex in a complex adaptive world, and we need to constantly tweak to adjust to the world. So every team will have its own way of working, and using DA to look at what are the options there can help the teams to actually make informed decisions about what could work best for them, remaining enterprise aware. What some of the teams do have is also external working agreements, those aquamarine boundaries that also defines on how the teams are supposed to interact with one another. And sometimes it's informal and sometimes it's formal, and there's some guidance from DA around that. The next thing is that there's myriad roles within organizations and within IT organizations as well. And the moment you start talking about job titles, when you bring Agile into the conversation, you find yourself going down a very steep slope on skis. So what DA does give, it calls on some typical patterns which reflect the scope of the toolkit, and then it talks about what other enterprise roles may need to interact or you may need to consider around that. So it gives you a lot of guidance on how to approach the thinking around roles and not necessarily job titles.
Right, which takes us to this idea of view of process blades. In other words, as an overall coverage or surface area for Discipline Agile, it's not just Discipline Agile delivery that you see here at the bottom. That would be like the engine. there's also all the context in which that delivery focus is occurring. In other words, the disciplined agile delivery starts with a half a dozen process flows. The next version of disciplined agile that is going to get released in the next few months actually brings a seventh element in there as well, to recognize that in some contexts a serial approach is perfectly appropriate in a given context. Then around all that, there's also disciplined DevOps to recognize the importance of continuous delivery and other specific elements around security support, operations, data management, and so on. And then on a broader scale around the DevOps, there's the rest of the disciplined agile IT elements of reuse engineering, IT governance, and then again, a number of elements that straddle all the way out to the disciplined agile enterprise around continuous improvement, enterprise architecture, people management, portfolio management, product management. How do you handle all of that at scale and do so well? There's a lot of insight in the world of agile and lean practitioners that has a lot to say about how adaptive governance, for instance, might be affected. And then even broader than that, there's business operations and finance and legal and marketing and procurement and sales and control elements that will have an impact on how well the rest of the process blades can actually operate. So what disciplined agile brings is it has suggestions, it has opinions, it has clarity on every single one of these hexagons in all of these process blades. So think of this collection of process blades as a way of focusing attention, as an attention focusing device. So that very rapidly you can think, okay, so what about this governance? Oh, okay, I can have a look at that and see what does disciplined agile have to say in that space. Or reuse engineering, what are the kinds of things that we should be paying attention to? And you're going to see later in the presentation this idea of a process goal, and then with a number of process elements. Aldo's going to take you through that. And for many of these hexagons, there are disciplined agile established process goals and process elements. And in this way, we actually bring clarity and a systematized access to a lot of great ideas, and you can situate them in a specific context, and you can ask really great questions. Why aren't we considering something different? What are we doing here? Oh, only this. Oh, could we try something else? Yeah, what? And then you can look at the discipline agile assets, and you can get a lot of really good insight quite quickly. Next slide, please. Right. So an interesting challenge for many teams. You want to have a starting point. You can't easily just say, okay, everybody, as of Monday, we're going to start working in a completely different fashion, but we don't know exactly what it is. We're just going to adapt from whatever we feel like doing. That seems a little bit strange and extreme. So the starting point life cycle is the agile and the lean starting point life cycles essentially give you an archetype. So the agile life cycle is essentially about iteration. It's about rhythm. Nobody says that over time, even if you've started with the agile life cycle, you can't actually practice and introduce elements of lean thinking and practice. So there's nothing stopping you in the middle of your sprint from actually using a Kanban board and actually having a nice, smooth, continuous flow of work during your sprint. Discipline Agile doesn't prevent you from doing that. And the simple fact that we have the Agile and the Lean starting point life cycles separated doesn't preclude that. It just says, consider where you're starting from. These are just foundational patterns to start from. And there's some guidance as to how to decide on which is important and which do you want to start with. The continuous delivery flavors of the starting point life cycles, like the continuous delivery agile and the continuous delivery lean, they are more intended for the long-term maintenance and enhancement of existing systems. In other words, in terms of, if you remember the unified process and the ideas of inception, construction, transition, the continuous delivery focuses primarily on construction. How do you keep building and keep releasing business increments out of your delivery engine. In other words, you don't worry too much about setting up business cases and worrying about how easily can you actually transition into production. The continuous delivery life cycles assume that those things are kind of well understood, well dealt with. You focus primarily on the middle piece of creating more value flow, more business increments. The exploratory starting point life cycle is very much along the lines of Eric Ries's lean startup. So it's this idea of build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. You focus much more on um, try and experiment, learn something, and then decide, do you pivot or continue? In other words, the exploratory life cycle is usually seen as a precursor, as a preamble to then deciding, aha, once we have enough clarity about value to the key sort of primary persona, then we can actually say, okay, let's go with an agile or a lean approach and then manifest that particular product or service. The program life cycle is about deliberately combining multiple teams into a program type effort. So the program starting point life cycle is most suited where you have to say, okay, now we need a dozen teams to coordinate around a particular product line. What do you do? Okay, as far as DA is concerned, you'd say, okay, in this case, start with the umbrella program starting point lifecycle. But by the way, within that umbrella starting point lifecycle, you can still have an individual conversation with each team to say, where does this team need to start from? So there's nothing stopping you from actually having a hierarchy where you say, yeah, overall, we're using the program lifecycle, but this team is going to use the agile lifecycle, that team is going to use the lean lifecycle, and these other two are going to use the continuous delivery lean life cycle or something of that nature. So there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of variability that's possible. Because that's kind of the essence of disciplined agile. It's not about telling people you must do this and reduce variability. It's much more a matter of deliberately making possible for people to go divergent and explore what would fit better in our environment, then experiment, learn from that, and situate that in our given context such that is truly effective. So we're not seeking compliance for the sake of compliance or uniform behavior for the sake of consistency. Yeah, consistency for its own right makes no sense because you're not going to have a customer that's really happy that your work processes are consistent. The customer is happy that the product actually works and it does what they need to when they need it to, not that, oh, I'm sorry, we're late because we needed to be consistent with such and such. That makes no sense to the end customers. Next slide, please. So remember a few moments ago, I mentioned this idea of inception, construction, transition. What Disciplined Agile brings is this focus on key specific milestones. So stakeholder vision. You have the stakeholder vision sorted. Wonderful. Therefore, you can actually advance to construction. One of the first things that you want to do in construction is you want to have a proven architecture. You want to actually show with working code and system elements, can we do this? Is it doable? Does it meet the non-functional envelope that we needed to in terms of performance, scalability, security, and so on. Those of you that remember things like the rational unified process and the other related elements, what's missing here is that deliberate space of elaboration. So elaboration, if you will, has been simplified away into the elements of construction. So what you see here is essentially the proven architecture that's a remnant of elaboration. And then throughout construction, you keep asking about the continued viability. Does it still make sense to create this product? Is it still relevant in the economic and organizational context? Do we have sufficient functionality? And if we do, then we're ready to transition and release to a customer population. Now, do we have all that we need to actually put it in the hands of users, making a consumable solution? Is it production ready, right? If so, then yep, we're taking it into production. We're releasing it to a grateful stakeholder population. Do we have delighted stakeholders? Do we have stakeholders that go, yay, this is actually helping us get our jobs done really well. It has a great fit between the features that are provided and the jobs that we need doing. So, yep, well done, success achieved. So that, in a nutshell, is a way of focusing attention on asking the right kind of questions to see that the collaboration of leadership and management and execution flows smoothly. So lean and agile governance has a lot of support from the disciplined agile way of looking at things. So the way of framing things in this way helps governance controls to be really effective, really lightweight, and really harmonized with the way of work, in contrast to the traditional governance approaches that are much less fluid and flexible and well tailored for the execution of work. Next slide, please. All right, so this gives you a teaser as to what DA Flex is all about. Again, this slide has a little bit of a build, so I'll ask Aldo to kind of keep clicking the next button a little bit. So you see here we have the marketing, the strategy, the governance efforts that essentially make a hypothesis, if you will, because strategy without execution uh, to ensure traction is just an idea. It's a dream. It's potentially a delusion even. So you want to have a funnel of portfolio management to say, let's invest in these particular areas. So that portfolio management takes you into the product management and discovery intake. So you're going to get a business backlog that you're going to work to refine. And the product management is going to then hopefully give you rapid feedback of, does this product idea work? The disciplined agile delivery makes it possible to take an idea and run some rapid experiments and release them out into the community. So disciplined DevOps frees up your pipeline, makes the flow of valuable features and increments to the customer and stakeholder community easy. And then you have that cycle of realize, learn, and adjust, the build, measure, learn kind of thing. So the continuous improvement is plan, do, study, act. Again, it's not a new idea. We've known this for over half a century at least, if not more. And in the Flex framework, that receives pride of place. And then finally, you wrap all this up into the business operations. You want to see that the promise that you made with the strategies and the marketing efforts that you've done are actually truly effective and realized, and you realize the value, you've monetized it, you've achieved good customer satisfaction, you have a successful, thriving business. And with this, I think I'm handing over to Gareth.
Yeah, so for the next few slides, I'm going to talk about choosing your wow, choosing your way of working. And it's no coincidence that the book, the reference book, is called by the same name. And that book really is a dictionary. It's a reference guide. It's not something you'd read end to end. And because there's obviously context counts. It's one of the principles. Pragmatism is important, and so is choice. Choice is good. So if we could go to the next slide. And I just want to pick up on the question by Linda before. And she asked, what if you're starting with a brand new team? What if your staff aren't sufficiently skilled? Well, frameworks aren't silver bullets. If you read the Scrum Guide, it says that on the second page, I think it is, that it's not a silver bullet. And often people think that the frameworks and the methods will solve all of their problems. They're a good starting point, but often because of your context being unique, you need to consider what is optimal for you and try things. The next question, what if the prescriptive advice doesn't suit your organization's context? So a cookie cutter approach, which may have worked at Spotify or at Toyota, may not necessarily work for you. So again, it's a good starting point, but we have to consider pragmatism and what works for us. Context definitely counts. And thirdly, why wouldn't you strive to do better than simply copying someone else's approach? This is the problem we've got. If you try and use a framework or a method, you may have a temporary or small incremental improvement, but if you stick with that and don't go any further, you're not going to continue to grow. So if we go to the next slide and think about a method, and you go through a change model, you have a new organization, and let's say we approach an initial learning curve. Things go down to begin with. We get that valley of despair. Then if we progress along, things get better, but then we plateau. And now this surprised me when I read this. We hit what's known as a method prism. That was coined in 2017 by Ivan Jacobson. And I think we've all got experience of this. So you may have heard Jeff Sutherland say, do twice the work in half the time. And many of you who've worked with me would have heard me boldly say that you adopt Scrum, you can get up to 900% improvement. Well, that may be the case for some teams if they have the continuous improvement and they don't just do a single step transformation. The research that we've read, if you can go to the next part of this slide, please, Aldo, is that Agile methods, so some of the frameworks we know, generally have 7 to 12% more productive outcomes on average. And this source was by Reefer, and he's agnostic, so he's not wedded to any particular framework or association. Scaling frameworks, surprisingly, is only 3 to 5% more productive. And maybe that's because of the increased complexity of larger scaled approaches. But as you can see, you may have a dip, the hockey stick, but then you hit a plateau very rapidly. So what can we do about that? And the next slide hopes to address this. So again, if you want to choose your way of working, successful agile organizations have an emergent way of working. There isn't a single best practice. There isn't a good practice. So sustained success cannot come just from adopting a framework such as Scrum or SAFe, although they may be a good start. And I would recommend, if you are going to use an agile framework, an iterative framework, then you still need to follow rigor and be disciplined about it. There's no point taking a half-baked approach. We still need to be disciplined. And that's why I like Disciplined Agile, the name. And the second thing to consider is, for true and enduring business agility, we need to choose our agile way of working, which is context specific, using a bespoke agile approach which works for us and our unique context and our unique journey. On the next slide, we think about Kaizen loops and improvement by experiment. So Aldo, if you can just roll through all the way to this slide. You'll be familiar with this. It's very similar to the Plan, Do, Study, Act from W. Edwards Deming, the Toyota Kata, or the Improvement Kata, which Spotify use, and many organizations use this. You have a current condition. You need to know what your current problems are. What problems are you trying to solve? Then you imagine a potential countermeasure. You run small experiments. You assess those effectiveness, and you either amplify or dampen. You adopt which works, or you abandon which doesn't. Then you share your learnings, rinse and repeat. Plan, do, study, act. Those are Kaizen loops, and Kaizen is at front and center of everything we're doing here, which is a compounded continuous improvement or continual improvements. And that's why Horio and I are both Kaizen coaches and Kaizen artists. So over time, taking this approach, our effectiveness may have a response curve similar to this. Of course, it's not linear. There's going to be fits and starts. And the question is, how can we make it steeper? And how can we make the dips smaller and the spikes steeper? So we're not transforming, we're evolving. Sometimes experiments fail, but you learn something. It's still a failure. It's okay to fail. Failure is fine, but succeeding early is better. And the way we do that is small, bite-sized experiments. It's better if we succeed more often and we improve faster with small incremental improvements. It's even better is when we imagine those potential countermeasures based on experience and we guide the continuous improvement. This is where bringing a coach in who has experience can help. So we can use this using an access to a process knowledge base like the Disciplined Agile Toolkit and the Choose Your Wow book, which I mentioned before. Next slide.
Okay, so this is where I'm going to jump back in and actually explain it. There's been a question about, sorry, I just missed, it scrolled up. Can you give an example of how an organization has already adapted DA? So this is an example in a single team, but most of the DA decision areas or process goals, as they call, has got this type of view. So for this is that initially you want to explore a scope, and then later in your product life cycle, you may want to come back and explore the next piece of scope. So when you look at exploring scope, here's the scope of areas that you need to perhaps think about. So what's the level of detail that you want to actually document the scope on? How are you going to explore the usage? So what are some ideas for you to explore some of the usage? What are the things that you can do about exploring the domain with the team? What can you do about exploring business, any processes that's there? For instance, business process diagrams, or you just use value stream maps, and what modeling strategies could you apply? So each one of these then give you, if you look at exploring the process, it's quite a lot of potential ideas that you can go and try, and go look in your own context whether the team that you're helping, maybe they don't use flowcharts, maybe they use UML activity diagrams. But each of those choices has got pros and cons, and it will affect how you actually then do the work downstream. So here's an example. Let's say the team that you're coaching at the moment is having problems identifying how people will use the solution, because they don't have access to those actual end users there out in the field. So the coach or the team lead says something like, hey, Dad, why don't we look at some of the potential options around exploring usage in the DA toolkit and see what we could try. So they look at all of those options. There's epics, there's outcomes. They choose persona as something to potentially try. And then the guidance that's in the book, you'll never find this on the internet, is that it gives a short description. So this is the start. This is pointing you in a direction or an exploration journey. It says that a persona gives you a detailed description of fictional people who will fill roles of stakeholders of the solution being developed. So when you choose this, here's some trade-offs to just think about. Used as a techniques to build empathy for users as real people and to understand the optimal user experiences for each. Maybe you've got to consider that it's useful when we don't have access to actual end users or potential end users. Maybe you sit in a different country, you're developing software for a totally different market. Or another trade-off you need to consider is can it be used as an excuse not to work with actual users. So there's some pitfalls that you need to be aware of. So just knowing that, it gives you a strategy in order to get some aspects or understanding of how to explore the usage. Now the conversation with the team may be then, oh, this isn't really useful for us. Then you go to, let's try UML. Would that suit our context? Or maybe you try and go about outcomes-based, etc. So this is the business end of the discipline Agile thing. So of discipline Agile delivery. Now you can use the same thing upfront when you plan out a project, and to say that given our context, we could potentially use this as our way of working, and that becomes the accepted standard. Then you know you've got to actually go and train people in it. But you can also use this in retrospectives and say, hey guys, we've had really bad feedback from our users, but they're very far away from us. What else can we try to actually explore how they may use our product or our service? So latching on to what
One small
Gareth
detail
said
there.
earlier.
Sorry, Aldo. So one more detail on the previous slide. If you look at the process goal map on the left, you'll notice that some of those items are written in bold, italic, and there's a little arrow beside some of them. So there's method to the madness there. It's not just a random thing. The lists that have an arrow essentially say the most valuable, most recommended technique is the one on the top. The least favorable one is the one at the bottom. Like the one, for instance, explore general requirements, that doesn't have an arrow. So essentially that says, well, any of those is okay. just pick what works for you. And for some of those that have, like for instance, explored the process, there's, you see, business process diagram in bold italic. That essentially says what you see in bold italic is a default starting point. In other words, if you're confused, if you're not sure where to start, going with the bold italic one, that might get you as a fairly safe starting point. That's the way to read the detail of the process.
Okay, thank you, Horia. So that brings us back to to Gareth's discussion about guided continuous improvement. By having a toolkit like that or a reference like that, you can actually now improve the effectiveness of your continuous improvement because you've got some guidance. You don't have to stumble around in the dark to try and when you follow this, sometimes you don't have guidance and you stumble around in the dark and you keep trying till you find an experiment that works for you. By having some guidance, you can actually accelerate the effectiveness of your improvement. So that's why it's called guided continuous improvement. The next slide actually explains that a little bit better. And this is the original curve that Gareth explained a little bit earlier. Is there underneath is the pit of despair. And then in order to break out of this method prison, you've got choices. You can actually use those choices not to be hemmed in, but actually evolve your own unique ways of working and then improving it up to a more faster improvement, a repetition, and as well as more effectiveness about it. And the guidance that they say, and this is what they've borrowed from quite a lot of practical applications of DA, is to start where you are and do the best that you can in the situation that you face, and always strive to get better. So that method prison is really hurting a lot of organizations. And I've lost my mouse pointer. That's really interesting. So it's hurting a lot of organizations, and just start where you are and then use the compound interest of guided continuous improvement over time to get out of that method prison. So this is where DA actually is a differentiator into the rest of the industry. Nobody else gives this complete umbrella of and categorizing all of those methods and techniques out there. So just to get back to the summary, is that DA is a rich and comprehensive, well-organized toolkits of strategies to help your organization to be more successful with Agile. And they don't recommend, when you start off, they don't recommend that you go big bang. They say the only approach that really works best is if you use guided continuous improvement to actually improve your agility over time. And that is where discipline comes in. DA brings that discipline. It's agnostic. Even safe is a valid choice in frameworks, in the discipline Agile framework, as well as Nexus and all the others that's out there. And it is an enterprise approach to Agile that that's been lacking in the past. And it gives you an understanding of your options and not getting caught up in that method prison, as Ivor Jacobson said. So better decisions lead to better outcomes. That's the long and the short of it. Now, DA has got some certification training, and it is called, you can go through quite a few layers of certifications. And we're running our next live virtual training in 2 weeks' time, and you can go book on there if you're interested. And we've only got 14 seats available. Now, let me go back and stop the slide deck and stop the share, and we'll go look at your questions.
Questions. Where does the name Disciplined Agile comes from? This is from Marcella.
True.
Got a feel for this, Aldo?
I was hoping you would answer it. So
I can, yeah. This came from Scott Ambler, basically. We did some work together about a decade ago, and he was trying to figure out how to say this kind of Agile that we're trying to talk about in Disciplined Agile isn't the cowboy Agile. It was a natural objection at the time where a lot of people kind of tried Agile and it didn't quite work. So usually people were like, oh, we tried Agile, it didn't work. And the message was, well, no, you've tried something, it doesn't work. You haven't been disciplined about what you've tried. So no wonder it didn't work, because you didn't stick with the deliberate practice to kind of get better at it. So that's what then gave the refinement of Disciplined Agile, and that's why we then had the Disciplined Agile Manifesto, and the Disciplined Agile Manifesto that started to kind of gain shape around 2011, about 10 years after the original manifesto. The original signatories said, you know what, we're not going to mess with it. We're going to leave it as it is. They refused, flat point, refused to fiddle with it. But Scott and quite a few others in the community said, you know what, that doesn't make sense, because all improvements are changes. There has to be some change to reflect what we've learned. And that's what led to then the Disciplined Agile Manifesto and the evolved principles behind the Disciplined Agile Manifesto. And if you go and look at the Disciplined Agile website, you're going to find the Disciplined Agile Manifesto and the principles. And you're going to see that things like working software over comprehensive documentation has changed to consumable solutions over comprehensive documentation, and customer satisfaction over whatever the other value is, has changed to stakeholder, right? So there are various points of emphasis that that have changed there. Is this good enough?
Yep.
Marcella?
Yes, all good.
Cool. All right.
okay, so
Nice. Can you give an example of how an organization has already adapted DA?
So was I don't know who is H. Makanye.
That's Hina.
Okay. The example I gave on that team, is that sufficient? Or do you want to look at other examples? Okay, let's move. Sorry?
Later on, is there any way where I can get more information if I want?
Yeah, actually, there's something called the Disciplined Agile Consortium, and the consortium website has quite a lot of extra material. There's another option as well on the Novavi website. If you go and look at the training page at the bottom, there's a Novavi Limited WhatsApp channel, so you can join the WhatsApp channel and get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to provide you further specific links and pointers depending on what exactly you're looking for.
Okay.
That's good enough. Yeah.
Cool. The question about from Matt Harris. Is that the Matt Harris from Canterbury? Okay, let's move on. How does Disciplined Agile compare and contrast to SAFe? Originally, when Gartner did their research, they categorized DA as a scaling framework, and actually it is not a scaling framework. As you've seen, it's a decision-making toolkit, and it gives you a lot of guidance. It's a reference for you to actually start your journey. SAFe is, we all know what SAFe is, I hope, and it is a prescriptive framework, and DA works really well to give you certain implementation choices when it comes to some of the real nitty-gritty stuff that comes with SAFe. I'm not going to say more about that. I think the examples we've used and explained is probably quite sufficient from the slide deck. Everybody okay with that? Cool. Gareth.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so Linda asked about this one, and I sort of addressed it in the slide I was talking through. And if you look at those process decision diagrams, the process flow decision matrix, you can see that it gives you a good starting point. And to get that ramp to start more quickly, you need to think about your current condition. But if you're in a brand new organization that's never tried any agile practice before, there are some good starting points that the disciplined agile ways of working suggests.
Well, one key factor there is mindset. In other words, if you want to do something like this, first you need to recognize as a leader that you accept the idea, the concept that you don't have all the answers, and the team ought to be enabled and supported to decide for themselves what works well. And if you don't trust them enough, then hey, you're going to have to do some work as to what level of psychological safety are you going to cultivate, what level of trust do you want to invest in your teams, what degree of control you're willing to relinquish, and to what extent. So disciplined agile isn't saying, you know what, you got to leave everything, take your hand off the tiller, let things run how they will. No, there has to be a level of balance. You need to understand what is okay to let go of and what isn't. Where do you draw the line? And there's no one simple answer. Teams need to explore this with their leaders.
Okay, cool. Gareth, you want to take the next one from John?
Yeah,
John,
John, good to hear from you again, John. Does DA support a bimodal lifecycle setup where a distinct large piece of or change of work program has a distinct elements that play different life cycle approaches? Yes, indeed. And if you remember that slide where you saw each of the individual teams, they may have a different life cycle. Now, of course, we need to understand how the trade-offs with the differences and how much we standardize or localize. But DA accommodates for that. And so as a consultant always say, it depends. But the bimodal life cycle is totally legitimate. And I know Gartner a few years ago were really big on this. And disciplined agile does complement that. Does that answer your question, John?
okay, cool. The next question, comment from Andrew was the governance model aligns to PMBOK very well. Yeah, governance is a reality. People are really concerned about how we spend their money, whether they're taxpayers or shareholders. So governance is built in. A lot of the practices that teams actually performs provides some of that governance. Think of it as daily stand-up. There is transparency there. You just need to know how to go look for that type of governance. Okay. Then Anthony Martyr, where do product management, product design principles such as continuous experimentation fit in? So, Horia, this is probably related to the slide on Flex and the discipline agile in IT. It's on that section that you've covered. You want to say something about that?
Well, essentially, disciplined agile by its very nature is about continuous experimentation. So it's not that you should do it. It's a good thing. It's kind of, you have to, because that's the whole purpose of it. You don't choose a particular selection of process goal elements and then you stay there, because that's fixed. That's not about perfecting. That's about staying fixed. That's method prison. You deliberately want to fiddle with things and change things and not be content and say, it ain't broke, mate. Let's not fiddle with it. But you actually want to cultivate curiosity and creativity and try out how do you make it better. So that's kind of an underlying foundation and principle of DA.
And one thing I'd like to chip in there, Aldo and Horia, you don't realize this, but Anthony works with me at Plexia.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
one thing, Anthony, and there's quite a few Plexia people there, I'm willing to offer that we have a Plexia-specific conversation that I can jack up between the three of us. And anybody else who's interested, just contact us.
Nice. Okay.
Okay, cool. How are we for time? We've got 6:43. This was booked till 7. If I'm
We have
not
a few more
mistaken,
questions.
Beth.
Yeah, we have time for a few more questions.
Okay.
Yep, we totally have time. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to check that. Fraser pinning to everybody. Does DA consider HCD and a broader CX practices?
Hold on. I think, did we miss the, does DA have some
Oh.
toolkit to support outcome measures and deal with the constant delivery DevOps? Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries. So that's from Adriana Sorti, I think. Adriana, yes, there's a lot around DevOps. You may have seen there's a whole process blade around DevOps. So there's quite a lot of guidance in that space. Have a look through the process blade, familiarize yourself with the disciplined Agile and the consortium websites. And if you want to know more, I've shared in a link below the WhatsApp channel, or if you prefer email, info@novavi.co is also viable. Hook up with us. You can find us on LinkedIn as well. We're always happy to answer further questions. So the next one from Fraser,
Okay.
and customer experience. And the answer to that is, again, yes, definitely. While Disciplined Agile isn't trying to be a design thinking framework or anything like that, it does pay homage to the various human-centric design and continue sort of user experience practices. So it's more a matter of embracing what works, and you will find elements of them reflected in the various process goals.
Okay, I've got a message that was sent to me privately as a question, not to everybody. So it is, how does DA help or hinder the scenario of two Agile practitioners in a room with 11 different opinions? And again, this comes in with choice. Because it's all laid out there, you can then work out through experimentation what could potentially work best for that given situation. I call it.
I mean, we've got experience of that where it's almost religious wars I've seen at some different organisations, and so we need to step above that and say we don't know. You know, person A thinks practice A will work. Person B thinks practice B will work. I'll tell you what. Why don't we do an A/B test? And we need to be more mature, but then disciplined about how we run those experiments and do that plan, do, study, act in a very tight circle and learn, because nobody knows. We're in a complex world.
Yeah, but the challenge there, Gareth, is that you actually have to cultivate the humility and the vulnerability to actually be comfortable saying that, because, hey, you're the boss. You're supposed to have all the answers, right? That's why they pay you the big bucks.
That's
well,
the big thing about being a leader, right? You have to say, I don't know, because we don't know. We can't pretend we do.
Yeah, well, we can, but it's flawed. That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. John Knight asked another question. Where does the UX blueprint and service design sit? So what's really nice about this is if you find you have additional practices, DA has actually got a navigator in their website. Once you remember, and you can actually go and find an online reference and add it for your own context. So that's really a nice addition to do that. So if you find a new way for that example we used earlier about exploring usage, if you find another method or a practice, you can add it for your context and share that in your organization or in the wider community. I gave a talk last year, so I'm just going a little bit wider than UX blueprint and service design. I gave a talk last year for DA Day 2019, and I suggested when it comes to change management that they actually look at all the change management framework options and add that. So they quite liked that, and I suggested that as well. So there's nothing stopping you from adding additional practices that you find out there, either just for yourself or in the community.
Right. We have a nice question. Very nice to hear from you again, Karen. Where do some of the people / culture / leadership aspects come through? They are most strongly recognized in the Disciplined Agile Enterprise Blade. Remember how we talked about the process blade? So in the Disciplined Agile Enterprise Blade, there are specific elements in there where there will be process goals and discussion around that. There's also a whole other book about a disciplined agile sort of primer for executives, and there's kind of specialized training in that space. And that also ties into the next question, or when and how can I learn more about DA? On the one hand, there's a disciplined agile website that's now become a subsection of the PMI.org website. There's the Disciplined Agile Consortium website. That's the organization kind of underpinning the training and certifications around Disciplined Agile. And beyond that, there will be training and coaching opportunities. As I mentioned, as Aldo mentioned earlier, our next training is going to be available in the next couple of weeks. Go visit Novavi.co as a website, and you're going to see what offerings are coming up.
I'm going to jump in there.
What is the cost? Okay,
Sorry.
sure, go ahead. Yep.
There's a next one from Penny Geared. Sorry if I got your name wrong. Is the DA Toolkit extended, updated to include changes and learning in the industry? Yes, every process blade is updated regularly with changes in the industry. So if you look at each of the process blades, there's a version number at the bottom of each of the process blades, and that's the latest one on the websites. You can go have a look at that. Okay. Aurea or Gareth?
Right. So the next question is, what's the cost of the training? The training is offered through Eventbrite. So the prices are in US dollars. Go ahead, click on the booking links, and you're going to get the costs. The training is structured as 3 different offerings because there are 2 different elements. So the first day is Foundations of Lean. That's 1 day offering. The next 2 days, so the April 30th and May 1st, are the Foundations of Disciplined Agile, and then you can take the whole 3-day event. So that's the third ticket. So if you want to see for the overall cost, you go for the 3-day. Otherwise, you can take the 2-day, or if you only are interested in the Foundations of Lean, you can take a 1-day as well.
Thank you.
How does DA support innovation and development of new tools?
I just answered that through the versioning.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks for the value in disciplined agile. How would you describe the benefits of disciplined agile compared to or with SAFe? You want to talk through this through Aldo, or do you want me to?
Sorry, I was looking at other questions. I was looking ahead.
I don't think it's an either or. It's not a dichotomy. I think it's not disciplined agile or SAFe. It's disciplined agile and SAFe. So if you are in an organization that's adopted scaled agile, many of the practices are already in the choose your way of working. And it's the question of what else can we wrap around that to enable it to be more effective in your context.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. I'm going to Linda Mo's question. Do you have an assessment process of some sort that you do to determine where an organization is at, what the context is, and what you're dealing with? Yeah, they have some tools to visualize elements of the context. These are called scaling factors, and once you understand those, and then you can actually go and look at the guidance provided with each of the process blades, as well as the choice diagrams. That gives you quite a lot of ideas about how to assess the maturity of a given organization or a context. It is also when it comes to making some choices, especially around life cycle, you do have some guidance around how to choose the correct life cycle for a specific context. So if it's very hierarchical and very traditional, then it's got a decision diagram that it takes you through in order to figure out what are the best fit in terms of a life cycle that you can start off with, and then what other life cycles over time you can move into. So it answers that, it gives you that guidance in there. Linda, I hope that's sufficient. I'm just conscious of the time. We're running out fast now. So I'm going to move on to the next one with you, Gareth or Horia. Which one do you want?
So this is from Jim. Hello, Jim there. So DA is similar to what Ivor Jacobson's SE Methods and Theory, SEMAT, scaled for software development. So that's just a statement there. Aldo, are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar with Ivor Jacobson's latest work. So
it will be something I'll take away.
My view is that it's,
Sorry, Horia.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Gareth.
No, it's yours.
Yeah, go ahead. You were going to say. I don't want to interrupt.
I've forgotten what I was going to say. Jim, I will.
Okay, cool.
That.
Right. So my personal perspective is that it's very similar. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very similar, but Disciplined Agile is contextualized to the current situation. So Ivor's work has a range of more, shall we say, historical influences, whereas Disciplined Agile more deliberately tries to build a more cohesive picture and fit in, now that they've kind of joined the PMI sort of family, with kind of the Flex offering and the Brightline to offer a full end-to-end enterprise scale path to professionalism in product development and systems engineering.
Okay. Yeah. I think his latest work on Essentials and CMAT from Ivor does exactly the same, but at the individual software team level, and the process around that, and looks at what are the essentials and is agnostic and gives a sort of checklist around how do we understand user requirements all the way to deployment from a team level process, which I really like, the fact that you can fit Scrum or whatever you like into that framework. And to me, it looks like DA does the same sort of thing, but taking it now to the enterprise touch points and looking at that whole enterprise process of going from portfolio to product to teams. So yeah, I really like that.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Could I just hop onto Linda's question there? So why this training over Agile Coach or Kaizen Coach training? I don't think it's one or the other again. So I would still recommend, and the clients I'm at the moment, I would recommend the coaches going on like a PSM course. And I think this is something else. It's if you have Scrum teams, then become a certified or professional Scrum Master, and then look at what Disciplined Agile can do in addition to that. So I would see it as an and instead of an or.
Cool, thank you.
Right. Now, in addition to that, later on, there will be certified Disciplined Agile Coach training offerings as well, but PMI hasn't quite gotten around to allowing the delivery of those courses in an online format. There's been an enormous amount of work behind the scenes to even make it possible for the current training that we're offering to be officially sanctioned as deliverable online. As you might imagine, nobody was prepared 2 months ago that, oh, by the way, we have to reinvent completely how we do this kind of training and certification business. It's got to be online now. So there will be more of it coming later on. But bear with us at the moment. PMI isn't quite ready to let go of some of these training and certification methods into an online format. They're still insisting that some of it is done face-to-face. We'll see if that changes over time.
Okay, thank you. So Horia and Gareth, which of the questions do you think warrants the prize?
Well, you know, I like the mindset, this is my position, of lots of small bets. So somebody who asks lots of questions would be my vote.
Okay. I like the question from, where was it? Oh man, no, I've lost it. Horia, what did you like?
Let me have a quick look. I think we have one more question from PB. I see the PMI certification is getting a DA flavor. What's the thinking behind this so we don't end up with more certs? I know that PMI is busy working at streamlining its certification portfolio now that they've embraced this. So I don't expect to have a vast number of certifications. There will be fairly targeted, fairly specific. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. In terms of which question did I value, let's see, in terms of insightfulness. I like Linda's query around what if you haven't even started and you're trying to make your way. How do you start? How do you approach this? So
I think I agree.
I like that
The answer is
that kind of energy and curiosity. Yeah.
I think if we sent this over to Linda, it would be a good starting point.
Okay, so we'll send that to Linda. Beth, are we able to get Linda's contact details so that we can mail it to her?
Yep. Linda, she's in the chat room now, so she can just put her contact details in there, or we can do it private Slack, or she can private message you guys. So we are.
Congratulations, Linda. Well done.
Time. Yeah. Good job. Good job. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Aldo and Horia and Gareth. This was amazing. So I know there was a lot of learnings. I have been recording it, so we will put that recording somewhere. It's going to be on our Slack channel, probably our YouTube channel as well. And for those of you that are still hanging on, I appreciate it. Our next meetup is going to be next Wednesday, the 22nd. The Secret of Behavioral Change. That's going to be with Suki Zhao. And just remember to connect with us on Slack, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. And we are looking to start up Basis at Breakfast again, but stay tuned for that. So again, thank you all for joining. It was amazing. And thank you to the team at Novavi. So
Thank you, Beth, for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. Awesome.
Cheers.
everybody.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good one. Bye.
Bye.